South Carolina had declared the tariff null and void. Federal troops were on standby. Andrew Jackson was ready to send the army. The Union hung on a thread, and the thread was a tax on imports. It had happened before. It would happen again. The story of American presidents and tariffs is the story of revenue, protection, and the moments when a single law pushed the country toward fracture. It began in the summer of 1789. The Constitution was barely in place. The first Congress had to fund the new government and pay down Revolutionary War debt. The Articles of Confederation had given Congress no power to tax imports that had changed. There was no income tax. No nationwide sales tax. Whiskey taxes had already sparked rebellion. The founders needed something that could be collected at a handful of ports: Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Charleston, without lighting another fire. Tariffs were built into the price of goods. They were easier to collect and less visible than direct taxes. Congress had the power to lay duties and regulate commerce with foreign nations. They used it. James Madison put forward a bill to tax goods coming into American ports. George Washington signed the Tariff Act of 1789 on July the 4th. It was the first major piece of legislation under the new republic. Duties on imports would supply the federal treasury and, in the words of the law, protect developing American manufacturers. Foreign ships paid more per ton than American ones. The law favored domestic shipping too. Vessels that carried foreign goods paid by the ton. The young government had its revenue stream. For decades, tariffs would supply the vast majority of federal receipts, often more than 90%. Customs duties collected at the ports kept the government running. But the same tool that held the government together would also pull the regions apart. The North wanted protection for its factories. The South sold cotton and bought finished goods. High tariffs meant higher prices and, they argued, unfair burden. The tension was there from the start. At the time, no one could see how far it would go. By 1828, the tension had a name: the Tariff of Abominations. Southern politicians had helped design a bill they thought was so harsh it would never pass, a trap for President John Quincy Adams. Instead, New England representatives voted for it on protectionist principle. The bill passed the House by a narrow margin and Senate too. Adams signed it in May. Duties on some imports reached 38 to 45%. The South erupted. They called it an abomination. British demand for Southern cotton was hit. Northern manufacturers were shielded. In South Carolina, the idea took hold that a state could nullify a federal law it deemed unconstitutional. The Vice President John C. Calhoun wrote an anonymous defense of that doctrine, The Exposition and Protest. What happened next would push the country closer to fracture than it had been since the founding. Jackson took office in 1829. He was a Southern Democrat, but he believed in the Union. South Carolina did not back down. By 1832, the state had declared the tariff null and void within its borders. Jackson made it clear he would use the army to enforce the law. He had already put down insurrection. He would do it again if the state defied federal authority. No other state joined South Carolina. A compromise tariff passed in 1833, lowering rates over 10 years and diffusing the crisis. The nullification crisis ended. The compromise brought rates down over a decade. But the line had been drawn. Tariffs could divide the nation. The same argument would echo in every tariff fight that followed. And the next time the stakes would be even higher. The pattern held. When the Whigs took Congress, the Tariff of 1842 under John Tyler raised rates again. Duties averaged between 23 and 35%. When the Democrats returned, James Polk's Walker Tariff of 1846 cut them, aiming for revenue rather than protection. The average rate landed around 25%. Trade expanded. The Treasury still filled. The Tariff of 1857 brought rates down again, the lowest in decades. Then came 1861. Southern senators had left Congress as their states seceded. The Morrill tariff focused on higher duties to raise revenue and shield Northern industry passed at last. It had been drafted with input from the economist Henry Charles Carey and sponsored by Justin Morrill of Vermont. James Buchanan signed it in early March, days before Lincoln took office. Historians have long agreed the tariff did not cause the Civil War. Southern delegates had already left. The Confederacy would adopt its own tariff, but the Union blockade meant it collected almost nothing. But the law signaled where power now lay. Under Lincoln, Congress raised rates again and again to fund the war. Additional Morrill tariffs passed. Revenue and protection went hand in hand. By the end of the Civil War, average tariff rates had climbed to roughly 47%. The federal government had found other revenue bonds, excises, income tax, but protectionism had become the new normal. The Republicans would hold the line for decades. What happened next would repeat the same irony on a global scale, but the real collision was still to come. After the war, Republicans kept tariffs high. The Civil War had shifted political power north. Protectionism was the policy of the dominant party. In 1890, under Benjamin Harrison, the McKinley tariff pushed rates on many imports to around 48%. The goal was to protect American industry. The result was retaliation. Trading partners hit back with their own tariffs. American farmers lost export markets. The law meant to shield one part of the economy, wounded another. Pennsylvania and the industrial Northeast had wanted the shield. The farms of the Midwest and South paid the price when other countries struck back. William McKinley, as president, signed the Dingley tariff in 1897, keeping protection high. Then the pendulum swung. When Democrats retook the White House, Woodrow Wilson and the Underwood Tariff of 1913 lowered rates. After the First World War, Warren Harding and the Fordney-McCumber Act of 1922 raised them again. Average duties on dutiable imports reached around 40%. The country was already at high tariff levels when the economy began to crack. The stage was set for the worst tariff decision in American history. Herbert Hoover had promised farmers help. In 1930, with the economy reeling from the stock market crash, Congress sent him the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. It raised duties on roughly 800 to 900 items, building on the already high rates of the Fordney-McCumber era. More than 1,000 economists urged him not to sign. The Senate had nearly blocked it. The vote was close, 44 to 42. He signed it anyway. Retaliation was swift. Countries that raised their own tariffs cut imports from the United States by large margins. Even nations that only protested reduced American exports. Global trade shrank. Some trading partners cut their imports from America by a third or more. Historians still debate how much Smoot-Hawley deepened the Great Depression. The collapse had many causes, and trade was only one factor, but it became the symbol of a trade war that made a bad decade worse. If this dive into how presidents have used tariffs has you hooked, like the video and subscribe for more history every week. The lesson was written in the record. Tariffs could backfire. From 1934 onward, Congress gave the president authority to negotiate reciprocal trade agreements and cut tariffs in exchange for foreign concessions. The reciprocity era had begun. Tariffs would never again dominate federal revenue the way they once had. After the Second World War, the United States led the move toward lower tariffs and freer trade. Average rates fell and stayed low. The GATT rounds and later the World Trade Organization embedded the new normal. But presidents still reached for the tool when politics or industry demanded it. In 1981, the Reagan administration pressured Japan into voluntary limits on auto exports to the United States, a backdoor tariff by another name. The initial cap was around 1.6 million vehicles per year. It was raised in the mid-80s, but the restraints bit. Reagan also imposed tariffs on Japanese steel and electronics. The goal was to protect American jobs and force reciprocity. Car prices rose faster than inflation while the restraints held. Reagan would later let the voluntary restraints expire, but the precedent was set. In 2002, George W. Bush imposed tariffs of 8 to 30% on imported steel, set to last until 2005. The European Union drew up a retaliation list including Harley-Davidson motorcycles, citrus, textiles aimed at swing states like Florida, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The World Trade Organization ruled the tariffs illegal and authorized billions in retaliatory duties on American exports. By December 2003, under political and legal pressure, Bush repealed them. Advisors concluded the tariffs had cost more political support than they had gained. Studies later showed the tariffs did not boost steel employment but did depress jobs in industries that used steel for years after. The pattern was familiar: protect one sector, squeeze another. Then came the biggest shift in decades. In 2018, the Trump administration launched broad tariffs on China and other trading partners, using national security and unfair trade as justification. Section 232 targeted steel and aluminum. Section 301 hit Chinese goods. Retaliation followed. Tariffs climbed on both sides. The trade war rewired supply chains and became a defining feature of the era. Joe Biden kept or expanded tariffs on select goods: steel, aluminum, electric vehicles, and certain imports from China, framing them as protection for American workers and industries. The rhetoric had changed, the tool had not. The debate that began in 1789 was still alive: revenue, protection, and who pays the cost. Economists had long pointed to three uses for tariffs: to raise revenue, to restrict imports and protect domestic industry, and to bargain for reciprocity. Every president who used them had chosen a mix. At the time, no one could see how far it would go. But the story had already shown its shape. If you want more stories like this from the past that shape the present, hit like and subscribe. Every American president who used tariffs did so in a specific moment with the best of intentions, the pressure of politics or the weight of the crisis. Washington needed revenue. Adams signed a law that nearly broke the Union. Hoover signed a law the world would remember for the wrong reasons. The debate continued.